At Mum's church wing dedication, Dad thanked the architect, the donors, even the sound guy. He skipped the child who sat through every chemo and scrubbed every bake sale pan. I was staring at his name alone on the plaque when the pastor unfolded Mum's letter. That morning had the kind of damp chill you only get in a small town at the tail end of fall. The last yellow maple leaves in front of First Community Church fluttered once, then dropped right onto the hood of my old sedan. I turned off the engine and sat there for a minute, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the motor tick itself quiet like some old man exhaling. I looked up at the red brick church I'd grown up in. On the right side, the new wing gleamed. Big glass doors, clean white trim, a temporary banner that said Fellowship Wing, peeking out behind a cluster of white balloons. It looked perfect, like something off a church calendar. Mum had talked about a wing in a very different way, back when we'd drive home from chemo and her hand was freezing in mine on the worn-out couch. "All I want," she'd whisper, "is one warm room, a few soft chairs, some blankets, a coffee pot, so people waiting on bad news don't have to sit in those cold hallways. A little prayer room, that's enough." She never said anything about bronze plaques or ceremonies. She talked about people in plastic chairs. But here we were, with a polished wing and a printed program sitting on the seat next to me. The words on the cover hit me like a slap. The Robert Hale Family Fellowship Wing in loving memory of Margaret Hale. My dad's name, big, bold in gold ink. Mum's name smaller, down below, tucked into an in loving memory line like a footnote. I took a deep breath, trying to swallow the bitterness rising at the back of my tongue. I'd known this was coming. Pastor Daniel had emailed me the mock-up of the plaque last week. I'd almost said something. Then I didn't. I was tired. I'd spent 2 years saying things no one wanted to hear. "Lisa, you okay?" I turned. Pastor Daniel was standing by my car door, coat buttoned, grey hair ruffled by the wind. He was in his 60s now, soft around the middle, but his eyes were still kind. "I'm okay, Pastor," I said. "It's just a lot of memories." He nodded, looking past me at the new wing. "Today's going to stir up a lot. Your mum would be real pleased, you know." He hesitated, then tapped the inside pocket of his coat. The fabric made a soft crinkling sound over something square and stiff. "There's one thing," he said slowly. "After the service, I want you to sit right where you usually sit, same spot. Don't move, all right?" I frowned. "Okay?" He just gave me a small, sad smile. "You'll understand. Come on, people are already going in." I followed him through the heavy doors into the sanctuary. The familiar smell of polished wood and lilies off the altar hit me. People were murmuring, coats rustling, heels tapping on the old floorboards. It felt like walking into a photograph of my childhood. Up front, the family pew was already occupied. My father, Robert Hale, sat straight-backed in a navy suit and deep red tie, white boutonniere pinned to his lapel. My older brother Mark, in a perfectly cut blazer and expensive watch, sat beside him. Mark's wife, with her perfect blonde curls and soft perfume, completed the picture. Dad looked up when I walked down the aisle. His eyes passed over me, paused for half a second, then he gave the slightest nod. "You made it," he said. "Good. You should probably sit a little farther back so the photographers can get a wide shot of this row." "Farther back?" I stopped. There was a space on the end of the front pew, right next to Mum's usual spot. Well, where it used to be. "We've got the architect, the building committee, some donors coming up here," Dad said briskly. "You can sit in the third row. You'll still be close. Let's not make a thing out of this, Lisa. Today is about the wing, not about your feelings." Mark turned, rested a hand on my shoulder in that smooth, practiced way of his. "They're taking a lot of photos today," he murmured. "Dad's under a ton of pressure with all the fundraising. Just roll with it, okay? Roll with it." I'd been rolling with it for years, when Dad skipped chemo days to sit in finance meetings, when he called Mark to talk about blueprints but only called me to remind me of appointments. I stepped back and moved to the third row. I took the aisle seat. It was where Mum and I always sat on crowded Sundays, so she could slip out to the bathroom if the meds made her dizzy. One of the older ladies turned around and caught my hand. "Lisa, honey, your mama would be so proud today," she said, eyes wet. "You look just like her. Thank you for all those drives to chemo. She bragged on you to all of us." I nodded, my throat tight. I wasn't expecting Dad to say anything like that. I hadn't expected it for a long time. The only people who ever mentioned those drives were women like her who knew what it meant. My mother wasn't the kind of person who got noticed. She was short, her hair a simple brown cut just above her collar. She wore soft sweaters and long skirts that never made a statement. She taught Sunday school for decades, organised potlucks, visited the sick, and always showed up with food when a baby was born or a job was lost. Dad was the loud one. He's tall, with a voice that fills a room. PTA president, building committee chair, the kind of man who always managed to wind up with the microphone in his hand. In this town, everyone knew Robert as the doer, and Margaret as the quiet woman who smiled beside him and carried the casseroles. When Mum's cancer was diagnosed, I was the only one living nearby. Mark had been in Chicago for years, working in finance, too busy for holidays half the time. I was 45, divorced, no kids, working part-time at the library. No one had to say it out loud. The chemo runs were mine. The waiting room chairs were mine. I remember that first chemo day down to the smell. Disinfectant, alcohol wipes, the sour tang of nerves and bodies. Mum sat in a fake leather recliner with a needle taped into her arm, eyes on the TV with the sound off snow tapped at the window. I sat in a plastic chair across from her, pretending to read. "Did Daniel say anything about the wing?" she asked, her voice thin. "He said if they ever get it built, they want part of it for a prayer room, part for a bigger kitchen, part for the youth," I said. "Dad's building committee chair. He's as excited as a kid at Christmas." Mum smiled faintly. "Of course, your father loves blueprints. He loves steel and lines on paper." She turned her head toward me. "What do you want in there?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I'd like a room that's not so bright. Somewhere with a few soft chairs, some blankets, a table for coffee, some books. A place for people like me, sitting while someone they love is behind a closed door. A place for caregivers, wives, husbands, kids, people who live in these hallways." She studied me for a long moment, like she was memorizing my face. "A wing for the ones waiting," she repeated. "If they ever build it, that's what I want it to be." She squeezed my fingers. "And if they ever put my name on a wall, I want yours next to mine, maybe smaller, but not invisible." I laughed, trying to keep it light. "Mum, I just sit in plastic chairs." "Those chairs are holy ground," she murmured. The service opened with a hymn I could have sung in my sleep. I sang along, voice wobbling. When the choir finished, the slideshow started. Pictures of Mum arranging flowers, carrying trays of food, smiling among a half-circle of wiggly children. I heard quiet sniffling all around me. The women in my pew were reaching for tissues from their purses. Dad sat in the front row, back straight, chin lifted. Mark leaned in now and then to whisper something that made him smile. They looked like two men proud of what they'd built. Pastor Daniel went up to the pulpit. "Today isn't just about opening a new wing," he said, voice warm. "It's about giving thanks for the life of Margaret Hale, a woman who taught us what it looks like to serve without fanfare." He talked for a few minutes, then invited my father up to speak. Dad rose, adjusted his tie, and walked to the pulpit to applause. "Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everyone," Dad began, his voice echoing in the sanctuary. "Margaret, my wife, was a remarkable woman. She loved this church more than she loved herself. From the day we first came here, she was in the kitchen, the nursery, the classrooms. She always told me, 'Robert, you go do the big stuff. I'll take care of the little things.'" I closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't remember Mum ever saying that. Maybe she had. Maybe he just needed to believe she did. "And that's what I did," Dad went on. "I worked hard, built my business, saved every dollar, so that today we could give this church a wing worthy of the vision God has put in our hearts." Then came the thank yous. Pastor, finance committee, building committee, architect, contractor, big donors, small donors, he named them all. He even thanked a teenager who ran the sound system and the older gentleman who directed parking. When I told Mark about my dream for this wing, he said, turning toward my brother, he didn't hesitate. He said, "Dad, I'm in. This is our family legacy." And he put up a significant amount of money to help make today happen. Thank you, son. More applause. Mark nodded, that polished half-smile he used in corporate photos on his face. I looked down at my hands. There was still a faint brown stain near one nail from scrubbing a coffee urn yesterday I waited. For one sentence. Just one mention that somebody had driven Mum to every appointment, baked and sold those cakes and pies, scraped plates and washed pans, and sat in plastic chairs in oncology waiting rooms. Nothing. Dad moved on to talk about the Hale family spirit, faith, sacrifice. He thanked our family in the broadest sense. He joked about how Mum always said he spent too much time at church. Margaret used to tell me I worked too hard for this place, he said, grinning. She'd say, if it weren't for Mark helping with the finances, you'd be lucky to build a broom closet. Thank God for giving me a partner who understood the vision and children who carry that vision on. The congregation chuckled. People turned to smile at Mark. Nobody looked back at the third row. It felt like a hand across my face that no one else could see. The applause at the end of his speech sounded hollow in my ears. Pastor Daniel shook Dad's hand, smiling tight. He glanced my way, and his expression darkened for a heartbeat. He'd seen me pushing Mum's wheelchair in here years after Dad had gone home to answer building committee emails. After the speeches, they invited everyone into the new wing for the ribbon cutting and plaque unveiling. The hallway gleamed with fresh paint and bright lights. Vintage black and white photos of church gatherings lined the walls. In the centre, in front of the big fellowship room doors, a bronze plaque stood on the wall under a square of red velvet cloth. A white ribbon was stretched across the doorway. Dad stood on one side, Mark on the other, smiling for the local paper's camera. Pastor Daniel asked folks to gather close. I stayed toward the back, shoulder to shoulder with the ladies' group. One of them leaned over and whispered, "You should be up there, honey. This is your mama's wing." "I'm fine here," I said. I couldn't tell if my voice sounded steady or not. "All right," Pastor said, raising his hands. "This is the moment we officially dedicate this wing to God and honour Margaret's memory. Robert and Mark, if you'd do the honours." They each took a corner of the velvet cloth and pulled. The fabric slid away, and the plaque shone in the overhead lights. I read it slowly. The Robert Hale Family Fellowship Wing in loving memory of Margaret Hale. Dad's name once again front and centre. Family vague enough to encompass everyone and no one. Mum, the woman who'd stood over hot ovens for bake sales and smiled at every crying child, reduced to a small italic line at the bottom. Beside me, Mum's friend Betty sucked in a breath. "Oh, my Lord," she muttered. "Margaret wanted this for caregivers, not for someone's ego." I swallowed hard. I still didn't cry. It felt like something had just gone very, very still inside my chest. Pastor Daniel cleared his throat and held up a hand. "Before we pray," he said slowly, "I need to do something I promised Margaret I would do." Dad turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Daniel, we have a program." "Robert," the pastor said quietly, "I made her a promise. I intend to keep it." He reached into his coat and pulled out that worn, cream-coloured envelope I'd noticed earlier. The corner was smudged with blue ink. I recognised the handwriting instantly. Mum's rounded letters. My pulse started beating in my ears. I'd seen that handwriting on sticky notes all over our kitchen, on birthday cards, on freezer labels that said "Save for Lisa." "Margaret gave me this a few weeks before she passed," Pastor said, voice dropping. "She told me if they ever build the wing, and if my daughter is still sitting in the back like she always does, I'd like you to read this to the church. If they've already done right by her, then you can give it to her privately." The hallway fell silent. People glanced from him to me, to Dad. Dad stepped closer, jaw tight. Daniel, I didn't know about this, he said. We should talk about this privately, not, I understand you didn't know, the pastor replied, still gentle but firm. Margaret didn't want you to carry this. She asked me to. He slid a finger under the flap and opened the envelope. He unfolded a few sheets of paper, edges soft and yellowed. Mum's handwriting ran across them in wavy lines. He took a breath. I won't read the whole thing, he said, just the part she addressed to the church. Then he began. Dear Daniel, dear church family, dear friends who have loved us, he read, and for a moment his voice faded, and I heard hers, little rough from chemo, but steady. First, thank you for every pot of soup, every prayer, every box of tissues, every hug in the parking lot. Without this community, I don't think I would have had the courage to get through the chemo appointments and those long, cold nights. If this wing is built, I want it to be a place for people like me and like my daughter, who have sat in hard plastic chairs holding bath bags and waiting for news from doctors. I want it to be a place for caregivers, for wives, husbands, children, friends, the people whose names are not on the charts but whose hands bring the medicine. Sniffles sounded behind me. The pastor stopped long enough for people to catch their breath. I know Robert loves standing at the front, he read on, and this time a few people let out a small shaky laugh. I love him for that. But God also knows exactly who sat in those plastic chairs next to me on winter nights. He knows who drove me home at 2 a.m. and went to work at 8. If the church wants a plaque, please make sure it acknowledges the people who serve quietly, not just the ones who speak loudly. If there's only room for one name, consider whether it should be the name of the man who signed the check or the woman who baked and tied the aprons. There was laughter again, but it died quickly. Dad's face flushed. As for the finances, Pastor continued, his tone taking on the weight of something legal, I have left a codicil with my attorney, Mr. Jenkins. Most of the money for this wing comes from my life insurance and savings from my salary as a teacher, my library work, and the envelopes I tucked money into after every bake sale. I am giving that money to the church on the condition that this wing truly serves the community, especially caregivers and people who are grieving, and is not used just to display big names. If that condition is not honoured, I ask that the money be redirected to a local hospice fund instead of used for bricks and glass. I also want to name my daughter, Lisa. She will not say any of this herself, she's like me that way, but I want the church to know. She sat in every waiting room with me. She scrubbed every baking pan when I couldn't lift my arms. She read scripture to me when I couldn't make out the lines. If there is room for one small line on the plaque, please write, dedicated to Margaret Hale and the caregivers who never left her side, especially her daughter Lisa, and all who serve in quiet. If there isn't room on the wall, Daniel, at least read it in your heart, even if you don't have a microphone. Pastor Daniel looked up. The hallway felt like it had stopped breathing. Betty was openly sobbing beside me. I saw grown men wiping their eyes. Dad sucked in a breath and stepped forward. Daniel, this is... Margaret was emotional at the end, he said harshly. We can't just take every line she wrote. This isn't just lines, Robert. The voice came from our left. We all turned. It was Mr. Jenkins, the town lawyer, white hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the man who'd always sat on the second pew left side with his wife. This is a copy of the codicil to her will, he said evenly. The original is in my safe. The terms about the wing and the use of funds were laid out clearly while she was fully competent. Dad's eyes went wide. Jenkins, you... Robert, Jenkins cut in, still calm. You signed as the person accepting the gift. I explained those conditions to you and Mark last year. If you didn't read them carefully, that's not on Margaret. Mark's face had gone pale. His eyes flicked from Jenkins to Dad to me. I thought it was boilerplate, he stammered. I didn't think she meant... I didn't realise... Pastor folded the letter carefully. There's more, he said, but that part is for Lisa alone. He looked back at the plaque. I think, he said quietly, until we honour Margaret's wishes as written, this plaque needs to be considered temporary. A murmur went through the crowd. Dad swung toward him. "You're humiliating me in front of my own church," he snapped. "Do you have any idea?" "Robert." This time it was the ladies' group leader, a tiny woman with steel in her spine. "This is Christ Church. It isn't yours. It isn't mine. And today, at the very least, you could try listening to your wife for once instead of worrying about your image." Dad actually stopped talking. I had never heard anyone speak to him like that in this building. Pastor raised his hands. "We don't need to hash it out here," he said, "but I am asking the finance board, the elders and our attorney to meet this week. We need to reconsider the name and the stated purpose of this wing and how we're using the funds Margaret left. After that, we'll change this plaque if we need to." Then he turned and looked straight at me, microphone still in his hand. "Lisa," he said, "thank you for sitting with your mum on cold nights. Thank you for every pan you washed, every drive you made, every time you pushed that wheelchair through the snow. Today, this church hears that—" My throat closed. Something heavy that had been pressing down on my chest for years shifted, just a little. I felt tears on my cheeks before I realized I was crying. The rest of the event dissolved into a kind of dazed confusion. Some folks slipped out, uncomfortable. Others clustered in small groups, whispering. A few squeezed my arm as they passed, eyes soft with pity or gratitude. One older woman hugged me hard and said, "Your mama would be so proud of you." I was heading toward a small side room, the one that would eventually be the prayer room, when Dad stepped in front of me. "Come with me," he snapped, opening the door to an empty classroom I went in. He shut the door behind us. The room smelled like dry erase markers and dust. Rows of plastic chairs were stacked against the wall. "Happy now?" Dad demanded, turning on me. "You satisfied you let them blindside me and drag our private business out in front of everyone?" I stared at him. "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "I sat in the third row, just like you told me. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't ask him to read it." "You knew he had that letter," Dad shot back. "You could have told him to keep it in his desk. You could have insisted he talk to us first. Instead, you stood there while he made a fool of me." "Why do you think it's all about you?" I asked, still keeping my voice even. "This was Mom's money, Mom's wing, Mom's letter. You signed her conditions, I didn't." He walked closer, anger rolling off him. "You always do this," he hissed. "Always playing the victim, always clinging to your mother, acting like you're the only one who loved her, as if I didn't give up anything, as if I'm just some selfish man who likes microphones." "I've never said you didn't love her," I replied. "I've said you love differently. You love with bricks and plans and budgets. I loved with plastic chairs and bath bags, and reading Psalms at 2 a.m. both matter. But this morning, only one version of sacrifice made it into your speech." He leaned back against the table, suddenly looking older than I'd ever let myself notice. "I built this wing," he said after a moment, softer. "I raised the money, I sat in those meetings, and in 10 minutes a letter and a pastor with no sense of timing undercut everything I've done." "The letter didn't undercut anything," I said. "The truth did. And the fact you thanked everyone but the person who was literally there every day with her. If you're ashamed, that's not the letter's fault. It's not mine either." He stared at the floor. "You think you've won," he muttered. "You and your mother, you think you got one over on me." I shook my head. "No, Dad," I said. "I don't feel like I won anything. I just finally stopped losing." We stood there in thick silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear kids running down the hallway, their sneakers squeaking, someone laughing, life continuing, no matter what. "I'm going home," I said, reaching for the doorknob. "Mum wouldn't want me in here screaming at you on the day her wing was dedicated." He didn't answer. I heard him let out a long, tired breath as I stepped back into the hallway. It took a few weeks for the dust to settle. The elders met, the finance committee met, the attorney came in with thick folders. People argued, some defended Dad, saying he'd poured his heart and wallet into this project. Others kept quoting Mum's letter about caregivers and plastic chairs. One evening, Pastor called. "If you're up for it, the board would like you to come by." he said. We've made some decisions. My stomach knotted as I drove over. They met me in a small meeting room in the new wing, bare walls, cheap fluorescent lights, one little cross hanging above a folding table. On the table lay the old plaque, face up, and something wrapped in paper beside it. We decided, Pastor said, that we needed a new plaque. He slid the wrapped one toward me. My hands shook just a bit as I peeled back the paper. The bronze gleamed. The letters were deep and clear. Margaret's Caregivers Fellowship Wing. Dedicated to Margaret Hale and the caregivers who never left her side, especially her daughter Lisa and all who serve in quiet. For a moment, I forgot to breathe, the words blurred. I realized my eyes were full of tears. We're going to hang this one, the ladies' leader said. Robert's contribution will still be in our written records, in meeting minutes and in people's memories. Nobody's erasing his work. But on the wall, we wanted to tell the story Margaret wanted told. Did my dad agree? I asked, my voice small. My fingers hovered over the word especially, like I was afraid I'd smudge it. Pastor let out a long breath. He's not happy, he said honestly, but he understands. If we don't follow the conditions of the gift, the church could lose the funding for this whole wing. More than that, he knows these were her words. He came in this afternoon, sat where you're sitting, and looked at this plaque for a long time. Finally, he said, "If that's what Margaret wanted," and got up and left. That night, I walked the hallways of the wing by myself. I touched the framed photos, the door handles, the soft upholstered chairs in the little prayer room, chairs I'd specifically asked for when Pastor asked me what I wanted here. I sat in one and looked out at the parking lot. It was nearly empty. That same lot had seen my mother's wheelchair roll across it, in snow, me stopping to tuck the blanket around her legs. "A wing for the ones waiting," I whispered, repeating her words. From my pocket, I took the scrap of paper Pastor had slipped me privately earlier that evening, the last page of Mum's letter, the part she'd written just for me. The handwriting wobbled more there, but her voice was as clear as ever. "Pierre, Lisa," it said, "if you're reading this, it means Daniel was brave enough to do what I asked. Don't be mad at him. Try to forgive your father if he acts like he doesn't know what's going on. Sometimes men don't read the fine print, but God still reads their hearts. I'm not writing this to shame your dad, though I know he will turn red as a beet. I'm writing it so you don't disappear from the story. You sat in the waiting rooms, you scrubbed the pans, you drove in snowstorms. I don't want you pushed to the back row one more time. But even if they still try to push you there, remember, in God's eyes, those plastic chairs in the hallway are as sacred as any pulpit." I folded the paper and pressed it against my heart. The tears that came then didn't burn like the ones at the dedication. They felt clean, like something had finally been set in its right place. Dad stopped sitting on the front row every Sunday. Sometimes I saw him in the second or third pew, a little off to the side. He still went to finance meetings, still volunteered for things, but he talked less in group settings. One afternoon, I came early to set up for the first caregiver support group we were hosting in the new wing. When I stepped out into the hall, I saw him sitting alone on a bench, staring up at the new plaque. The late-day sunlight caught the words Margaret's Caregivers Fellowship Wing and lit them up. He heard me behind him and stood. "You're early," he said. His voice was quiet, not sharp. "I've got coffee to brew, cookies to set out," I said. "These folks coming in tonight, they're tired. They need something warm." He nodded. We both looked up at the plaque. "Nice engraving," he said after a minute. "You can read it from the far end of the hall." "Yeah," I said. "Mum would like it." He didn't argue this time. After a bit, he sighed. "You're like your mother," he said. "You remember details. Sometimes that's a good thing." I didn't know if that was his version of an apology. Maybe it was. For him, that was a lot. "You headed home right after?" he asked. "I made too much soup if you want some. I'll be here until the group's over," I said. "But you can drop the soup by the wing kitchen if you want. I'm sure someone could use it." He nodded, walked up to the plaque like he wanted to read it one more time, then shuffled off toward the kitchen. He seemed smaller somehow, not because a plaque had changed, but because a bit of his pride had finally been sanded down. That evening, 6 people sat in a circle in one of the new rooms. A woman whose husband had just died of lung cancer, an elderly man caring for a wife with Alzheimer's, a daughter sharing night shifts with her brother so their mum wouldn't be alone. They talked about sleepless nights, about beeping machines, about the smell of antiseptic that never seemed to leave their clothes. I told them about my nights with Mum, about the plastic chairs, about driving home in sleet, and then coming back 8 hours later, I told them how Mum used to say, "This is holy work," about things like holding a basin or folding blankets. They cried, they laughed a little. And in that room, the wing felt exactly like what Mum had hoped, a place where the people in the hallway finally had a space of their own. Later that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop. My inbox was full of messages. Church members, old friends, even Mark. Some said I was brave for letting the truth be read. Others said they felt sorry for Dad. A few thought it should have been handled within the family. I clicked away from the emails and opened a browser tab I usually only use to read other people's problems, a forum where strangers asked, "Am I the arsehole?" I started typing, "I, 52F, am the daughter of a very visible man in our church. My mum served quietly there for decades and died of cancer. Most of the money for a new church wing came from her life insurance and savings, with a condition in her will that it be used to support caregivers and grieving people." At the dedication, my dad made a long speech, thanked everyone, praised my brother, talked about the Hale family legacy, but never once mentioned that I was the one who cared for my mum through 2 years of chemo, driving, sitting in waiting rooms, scrubbing bake sale pans. The plaque we unveiled said, "The Robert Hale Family Fellowship Wing, in loving memory of Margaret Hale." Then the pastor read a letter my mum had left with him, saying the wing was meant for caregivers, that the funds were hers, and that she wanted the plaque to say, "Dedicated to Margaret Hale and the caregivers who never left her side, especially her daughter Lisa, and all who serve in quiet." She also mentioned the legal conditions in her will. My dad was humiliated in front of the whole church. He says I let it happen, that I should have stopped the pastor and told him to read the letter in private, because I knew about the envelope. I honestly had no idea what was in it, and never asked the pastor to read it out loud. The wing has now been renamed Margaret's Caregivers Fellowship Wing, with the wording, "My mum requested." My dad is still angry and says I ruined his moment. So, am I the arsehole for letting the pastor read my mum's letter and for not protecting my dad's pride at the dedication after he erased me from the story? I stared at the screen for a long time, hands hovering over the keyboard. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the wind outside. I didn't know what thousands of strangers on the internet would decide about me. What I did know was this. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was sitting in the back of the room, unseen. I had walked up close to the wall, looked at the story of my life, and my name was there. Small, yes, but there.